guys, what you see before you is a 2016 Suzuki DR200S. This is my wife's new motorcycle. Yay! Why do we have a DR200S and why does she not have a Honda Shadow? Well, I think my dirt tendencies have slowly rubbed off on her. At the end of the day, she ended up selling her Shadow, her 2015 Honda Shadow 750. It just wasn't doing what she'd wanted. She really kind of barely rode it, and it was only street bike. Now she has a dual sport and the ability to ride on-road and off-road. So as you can see, this bike is pretty pristine. This thing really doesn't have any miles on it. It has 340 miles on it, so it's mostly sat. Bone stock, there's really next to nothing as far as modifications go. Now it is going to get some modifications, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So why did she get this bike? Why did she sell her Honda Shadow? As I mentioned, the Shadow wasn't quite doing it. The problem with the Shadow is it's a big cruiser. And the good thing about this bike is it's a nice, maneuverable, manageable dual sport for someone that's 5'5", okay? So my wife is big into hiking. She likes hiking the Appalachian Trail. She wants to hike the Pacific Northwest Trail and all these other trails. So she considered getting a motorcycle that she could take in the truck and drop off the bike, chain the bike up, plan it, and then hike to the bike and then ride the bike back to her vehicle. So use it essentially as a mule or a way to leapfrog as she's hiking. So not only that, but also she's been wanting to ride more, and by wanting to ride more, she's able to ride on the dirt, ride on-road, off-road, and just overall it's a little less intimidating than the Shadow. She liked the Shadow, but overall I think she's a lot happier with this. So the DR200S, as many of you know, has been around forever. This bike design hasn't changed since its inception. I'm not even pulling specs out in front of me here. I think it entered the scene around 1997 was the first year for it. It got a little bit of a revision. That's where the S came from in like 2010, I think. Maybe they changed a few things up, or 5 or something, but realistically this design is very basic. It hasn't changed hardly at all. So some things I'm not going to try to sell you guys on a DR200S. Obviously these bikes have clearly they've made their staple, their mark in the industry, but I will talk about some of the things that clued us in on why we thought a DR200S was a good dual sport for my wife. And that's really the key here, right? So there's a lot of small dual sport options, one of which is a TW200, and I looked really close at the TW200. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is why I chose, or why we collectively chose the DR200 over some of the other bikes. So what does the DR200 offer? First of all, it is the shortest bike. The key with that is that this thing only weighs 270 pounds, right? So it is very short, and it also can be adjusted. I've taken some of the preload out of it, and I've also slipped the forks a little bit. Now, one downside of the TR200 is that there's no lowering link available for it. So that's kind of tough. Now, where the DR200 shines over the TW200 is, for one, is tires. Because you have the narrower standard, this is a, I'm going to lie to myself here. I want to say it's not a complete 1821. It's like a 1721 setup. Either way, the tires, way more options than what you would get with the the TW200. So the tire options was big for us. Just to be able to get different dual sport tires and just to have different tire options. From the TW's perspective, you can only there's only a very few options for those fatty tires, right? So another thing that's a really big thing for the DR200 that shines is that it has a 3.4 gallon gas tank. All right, this thing gets 88 miles to the gallon per the specs. With 3.4 mile gas tank, you can do the math. That's pretty impressive. I mean, this thing goes a long ways. It's extremely simple. It's an air-cooled motor. You know, no issues whatsoever. So let's talk about some downsides. As I mentioned, lowering it. So what I found with the DR200 is no one really makes a lowering link, and there really isn't a lot of link options the way the suspension is designed on this thing. So you're pretty much at the mercy of two things. Number one, you could get a shorter shock or a shorter spring, and which would collapse the preload. You can adjust the preload up, but only so far, which we've already done. We did that for my wife, and it did help a little bit. And then the other piece is to just slip the forks up to keep it balanced. Now my wife she's a little person, she's 5'5". I'm not even going to guess her weight on camera or on my channel, so I'll save myself that one. But she's light, and she doesn't really compress the suspension. Now when I set on it, it squats pretty good, but for her, adjusting the preload put her on the balls of her feet enough to feel comfortable. Now if you had somebody that was, say, like 5 feet tall or something like that, you may run into a little bit of a problem. And some other bikes that may have that lowering link to really get it down may be more useful. But the DR200 for her, she's ridden it a little bit. She said she feels comfortable with it. She's on the balls of her feet, and we're pretty much going from there. So what mods have I done to it? Just that. I've adjusted the preload and one other thing, which is to get rid of the vacuum petcock. So we put a manual petcock on it. This little filter was actually added by the previous owner, which kudos to him. Very smart to do this, because the small inlet, you know, these bikes, it doesn't take long for things to get dirty and for things to clog up. So kudos to the previous owner. Super nice guy. You know, really, honestly, we couldn't have got a better setup. This bike has been well taken care of, and it's really clean with low miles. We're really excited about it. Now with the petcock itself, we went with the manual instead of the auto, for the main reason of with an auto petcock, aka vacuum petcock, you can't really turn the fuel off. The idea is that vacuum causes the petcock to flow fuel, which ultimately allows it to flow only whenever it's the engine's running. When you turn the engine off, it stops. Now the problem with that is everybody knows that fails and the engine overflows, which traditionally on a dirt bike is not that big of a deal, right? So the overflow would just overflow the carb, which would dump into the airbox, which should just dump on the ground like a regular dirt bike whenever you don't turn the gas off. However, because this is a street bike, our little fuel dump down there has a plug in it from the factory. And if you haven't changed that, then what happens is fuel continues to flow, it fills up the airbox, and guess where it flows back into? Down into the crankcase, which is exactly what happened. We started seeing fuel leaking because the airbox was filling up, and we started seeing like seepage, and it wasn't running right. And I was like, oh well, man, the oil was overfilled. Well, it wasn't. What had happened was it was a sitting, and the crankcase essentially filled up with gasoline because gasoline was coming in. It's a bad design, but Suzuki really didn't have a lot of options because, again, this is a street legal vehicle. They just can't put open vent tubes on the street from the factory. So in any case, we took the plug out of it, added a manual petcock. Now if she was to, for example, leave the gas on accident, then it would just drop, you know, it would run out on the ground, and then that would be that. Some people have replaced the vacuum petcock. I'm not a huge fan of it. I like having control of manual. She was with me on the same page with me once I discussed it, and then we were good from there. So that is the first big mod, right? So that should get me about what do you guys think? 5-10 horsepower? Yeah, probably not. So beyond that, what are we looking at for mods? Well, already on order, I've got some Tusk hand guards, which we're going to run the mirrors, the same mirrors that I ran on my KTM 500EXC, which work perfect. Get rid of these big bulky guys that probably would do the job well, but would get snapped off. So we'll run those mirrors. And then we're also looking at probably getting a rack on the back. So again, because she's using it for hiking and things like that, we want to be for her to be able to, like, you know, strap some stuff to the tail of it or whatever the case may be. And we'll see about some other things. I'm not going to get too crazy with mods because, again, she's using it for a purpose, for hiking. So if someone was to vandalize it or mess with it or something, you know, I don't want to get too invested in this thing until we find out that our plan for her to use it for hiking works. But we're very hopeful. We really think it's going to work well. And I'll tell you what, she says she may end up wanting to get a dedicated dirt bike. So Accelerate is giddy. Okay, I'm giddy. I'm jumping up and down over here. So we may end up getting her a dirt bike. If not, totally fine. She'll get to ride this, and we can do some riding on some, you know, some basic fire road type stuff and some basic double track trails, and we'll enjoy that together, and that'll be just fantastic. So we're really excited about the purchase of the DR200S. I've been riding this little bike around a little bit just as I did the maintenance and getting things sorted and adjusted and things like that. I'm so stoked. It's such a fun little bike to ride. Who knows, maybe Accelerate will get one. In any case, that's what I got for you guys. I hope you guys get out there just like us. I need you to get on two wheels, have a fantastic week, and ride a dirt bike. This is Accelerate once again, signing off.